All right, everybody, it's that time again. Let's talk about the second text that I signed to you guys for this week. Fewer responses. I think some of us may have gotten a little confused. We got done with Edgar Allan Poe's first story. We got done with Telltale Heart and went, okay, cool, that's it. I'm done for this Wednesday. That's incorrect. We have two texts this week, which meant that you needed to read them and engage in discussion for both of the texts. I'll try to be a little bit more clear about that moving forwards here. I feel like that may have been a little bit of a struggle, but we will do what we can to make it work. That's why we're doing this week. We're seeing what works and what doesn't. So we're going to walk through these questions real quick, make sure everything makes sense, and talk about this slightly longer but very interesting story that we just finished engaging with. All right. Like last time, I'll read through the questions. We'll talk about the questions. We'll move forwards. If you have not engaged in this discussion yet, it is not too late. You can still do that. Please come in here, respond to two of these questions, and then respond to one of your peers. Better to get an 80 than a 0. We need that done. Only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us haven't even engaged with this thing yet, and 2 of us didn't respond to our peers. We're missing some stuff here, right? Let's make sure we touch on this thing. This first question is similar to the first question from the last text. I'm asking you how the first person point of view complicates the text a little bit. I wanted you to talk about the narrator is reliable or unreliable, and where he might or might not be telling the truth. Notably, in this one, he's not as obviously mad as in Telltale Heart, but he's still probably dealing with some things, right? Let's see who answered this question. Did anybody? There we go. Jeremy. We have to believe what's going on. I agree. We have to believe his interpretation of the event, right? He's not the one dealing with abject madness in this story. It's Usher, right? It's his friend. In the beginning, it sounds like he's telling the truth. Jeremy says near the middle and the end, we start to question things. It starts to get a little bit more far-fetched, right? Even to the end where like the whole house crumbles into the ground as soon as he leaves it. It's very dramatic and it's very melodramatic, but it's interesting, right? He seems kind of off, but we have to trust him because he's the one that gives us some of those pieces of information that really complicate this text. Like he notices that there's color on the cheeks of Madeline when she's buried, right? And so he's like, huh, that's interesting. And you have to wonder, like, he spends a lot of time making excuses for his actions and for Usher's actions. And we have to kind of question, is this because he's telling us the story as a past tense story and he's changing what happened to make himself seem less guilty? Or is that what really happened? And I think that's a really interesting approach we can take to this. Question number 2 says that the text is strangely formatted. And that's mostly the version I gave you guys, but I think that matters. Things in all caps, M dashes thrown all over the place. And it's broken into parts when, yeah, it's a longer story than Telltale Heart, but it's not a long story at all. What does that do for the reader? We have to look at. Question number 2. Samir responded to question number 2, which is pretty awesome. It shows the reader kind of the inflection the narrator has. Samir says it helps accentuate like the stuff coming from that first person perspective that he brings in. It lets us give his own thoughts, and the M dashes and the different chunks kind of break it up, and so it helps us follow the movement of time, right? Because a lot of time passes in this story. It's not like Telltale, which is very quick. Like, I wish I could tell you exactly how many days. It's a good number of days that take place between him showing up and seeing the Usher twins, and then his friend kind of declining into more into his madness, and then the final moments of the story, which are pretty intense, right? Question number 3, speak on the mood and tone of this story. Tone and mood, awesome. Elmer says it starts off gloomy and scary. It's pretty par for the course for this type of genre, right? It's almost excessively gloomy and broody and dark and spooky. And it's more melancholic and sad and gloomy towards the end, right? And just keeps building on it. You think, okay, cool. He's described this place. It's this ancient looking moss covered castle that's been there forever in the middle of a boggy pit, and it's covered in lichens and mushrooms, and there's like a faint crack that goes down the side of it, and ooh, it's spooky and dark, and there's a weird gas that seems to come out of the ground, and then he goes inside and it's even spookier and darker, and you can't see the ceiling because it's so dark and recessed and gothic and huge. And then we meet the characters and they're gloomy. Like, it's just, it never lets up, right? And then Pamela highlights that it gets suspenseful and unexpected at the end, and that builds on this gloomy feeling, right? Like all of this setup he does of the house and the setting and all of this, it gets built on at the end when it starts to fall apart, and it explains kind of why they had this creepy room that Madeline gets put in. It really just builds on that tone, right? Excellent, Corbin. Suspenseful, keeps going on. The mood impacts the reader by setting the first part like to build the suspense, right? And it gets the reader's attention. And helps build up that intense feeling, right? You guys will notice this kind of thing happens in modern horror movies all the time, right? You get that gloomy setup to help build what's going to happen later. Excellent. Question number 4. I'm moving through this a little bit quicker because not as many people have responded. I'll probably bring this back in to an early video next week once hopefully we get a little bit more of y'all's responses and I can see the questions that you were asking each other. We are given a lot of specific information about the mental state of both the narrator and the other characters in the story. I asked you what the narrator says about Roderick Usher and Madeline and how it impacts our interpretation of those characters. We're told that his mental state is sad and kind of just, he's depressed, right? He's got some other stuff going on, but both him and Madeline are dealing with pretty severe depression, probably by no small means because of the location that they're in. And it's building on their mental illness that Roderick Usher has committed himself to the idea that his twin sister is going to die. All the doctors say it's going to happen. It's inevitable. She's dealing with all this stuff. She's very interesting to the doctors, but she's going to die. And that's got him pretty bummed out, which makes sense. So his reaction to her death is kind of like a big part of this story. Sorry, I'm reading. Pamela says that we don't get as much about the narrator in this one as we did in Telltale Heart. It's much more about the other characters. It's kind of like if we were reading Telltale Heart from a third person perspective, you could see like that madness kind of building up and the pacing and all that. And the narrator, this is a great point that she brings up. The narrator's specificity on the mental states of both the ushers gives credence to his own like mental acuity. We're supposed to trust him more because of everything he's saying about them. Like clearly he knows what he's talking about, which is pretty interesting, right? So that's pretty cool. I think this is a really interesting story. I think there's a lot going on. I think it's really interesting the way they combine the story that the narrator reads to Roderick. And every time there's a sound in the story, there's a sound in their world, and he stops and goes, well, that's weird. What was that? But Usher, he knows what it is, right? He's been dealing with his own guilt. We get guilt again. He's dealing with his own guilt and remorse, and like, I can't believe I've done this, and I thought she was dead and she wasn't dead. And I want to talk about like why he's so quick to bury her. And she's not, and we buried her alive, and I can't believe this, and she's coming for me. She's coming to get her revenge. And we have to start questioning if that's really what happened, because it's very far-fetched, right? That all of this would happen in the sequence that it happens. Again, those of you who have engaged with this text, good job. It's a tricky text. Like, some of it is really tough, and the way the language is used is challenging, and oftentimes you have to figure out what happened by like him describing what didn't happen, right? So thank you for surviving this and toughing it out, because it's a really interesting story. Please continue engaging with these discussions. Make sure that you guys are pitching questions for the second part due on Sunday. Please make sure that you're doing everything you guys need to do, and push your friends to check in. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people who have not touched this yet. That's a tricky situation. Please fix it. I appreciate all of you. Again, let me know if we can do this any better. I'm still working things out. And I can't wait to see what you guys say. Thank you.